June 6, 1944. 6:30 a.m. Normandy, France. Thousands of young men are dying on a beach. Machine gun fire tears through bodies before they even reach the sand. Landing craft explode. Soldiers drown under the weight of their own equipment. In the first 90 minutes alone, over 2,000 American soldiers are killed, wounded, or missing on Omaha Beach alone. Blood turns the surf red. The greatest military invasion in human history is unfolding in real time, and it is costing everything. But 9 miles inland, German panzer divisions sit completely still. They are not moving. They are not reinforcing. They are waiting. Waiting for an invasion that will never come. And the reason those panzer divisions stay frozen in place, the reason thousands of Allied soldiers survive who should have died, comes down to one man. One infuriating, brilliant, ego-driven, impossible man sitting in a headquarters in Dover, England, staring at a map of a beach he is not allowed to touch. His name is George S. Patton, and right now, at the most important moment of World War II, he commands absolutely nothing. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next video. Join us as we explore more incredible stories, historical events, and inspiring moments from the past. Welcome to the community. What you are about to hear is the story of the most complicated military deception in history. A plan so insane that when Eisenhower first heard it, he asked the same question 3 times, just to make sure he understood it correctly. A scheme that required the most aggressive, loudest, most self-promoting general in the American military to win battles in secret and pretend they did not matter. A deception that kept an entire German army frozen for 2 extra weeks, 2 weeks, that changed the outcome of the war in Western Europe. By the time it was over, Third Army had advanced 400 miles in 30 days. 50,000 square miles of France had been liberated. Multiple German divisions had been captured or destroyed. And it had all happened while the man responsible for it was being described to the press as a supporting player. This is the story of how Churchill, Eisenhower, and Patton, 3 of the most difficult men in the Allied command, pulled off the impossible. Not despite their differences. Because of them. May 1944. The situation. To understand why this deception was necessary, you need to understand how close to failure Operation Overlord actually was. The Allied High Command is under enormous pressure. The invasion of Nazi-occupied France has been planned, postponed, and replanned for over 2 years. Stalin is furious that the Western Front has not been opened. American public opinion is increasingly impatient. German defenses along the French coast, the Atlantic Wall, have been reinforced to a terrifying degree. And the Germans have an advantage that terrifies Allied planners. They have more soldiers than the Allies can land in the first critical days of any invasion. If German armored reserves reach the beaches within 48 hours of a landing, they can push the Allied forces back into the sea before a foothold can be established. The math is brutal. The timing is everything. The only way the invasion survives its first week is if German reserves do not know where to go. That is the entire problem. The Germans have the firepower. They have the tanks. If Field Marshal Erwin Rommel gets his panzers moving toward the right beach at the right time, thousands of Allied soldiers die and the invasion fails. Allied planners know this. They have known it for years, and they have built an elaborate, extraordinary solution to it. The solution is called Operation Fortitude, and at its center is a man who does not yet know he is the most important piece of a puzzle he cannot see. The man in Dover. George Smith Patton Jr. is 58 years old in the spring of 1944. He is the son of a military family descended from soldiers going back to the American Revolution. He attended West Point. He competed in the modern pentathlon at the 1912 Olympics. He designed the last cavalry saber adopted by the United States Army. He has been studying warfare as both science and art for his entire adult life. He is also, by every account from people who worked with him, one of the most exhausting human beings who has ever worn a uniform. Patton believes genuinely, completely without irony, that he is a reincarnated warrior soul who has fought in every great battle from ancient Carthage to the Napoleonic Wars. He carries ivory-handled revolvers on his hips like a gunslinger. He slaps a hospitalized soldier he suspects of cowardice and nearly ends his own career. He gives speeches so profane and so electrifying that soldiers remember them word for word 40 years later. He is magnificent on a battlefield. He is a disaster in a headquarters building. And in May 1944, he is sitting in Dover, England, commanding an army that does not exist. The army is called FUSAG, First United States Army Group. It has radio operators broadcasting fake traffic around the clock. It has inflatable rubber tanks visible from German reconnaissance aircraft. It has fake supply depots, fake barracks, fake motor pools, an entire military infrastructure constructed out of deception and rubber and carefully falsified paperwork. Tens of thousands of German intelligence man-hours have gone into analyzing FUSAG, and German High Command has reached exactly the conclusion Allied planners wanted them to reach. Patton is massing at Dover. The invasion will come at Calais. The deception is working perfectly, and it is driving Patton insane. "I am a general without an army," he tells his chief of staff one evening, staring out a window toward the English Channel. "A warrior without a war, and it is killing me." He calls Eisenhower constantly. He demands to know when he will receive a real command. He is watching Omar Bradley command First Army in Normandy. He is watching Bernard Montgomery command British forces. He is 58 years old, and he is spending the most important military campaign of the 20th century playing a role in a theater production. What Patton does not yet understand is that his frustration is itself a weapon. His desperation to fight is genuine, and genuinely dangerous men are the most convincing liars. June 10th, 1944. The idea that should not work. 4 days after D-Day, Churchill gathers his military planning staff in a private room in Whitehall. The Normandy landings have succeeded. The beachhead is established, but the advance is slower than predicted. Allied forces are grinding through hedgerow country. Every farm field is a potential ambush. Every village is a fortified position. The German armored reserves are still at Calais, still waiting for Patton's invasion, still not reinforcing Normandy. Churchill stares at his map for a long time. Then he proposes something that makes his entire staff go quiet. Give Patton a real army. Give him the Third Army. Send him to France publicly with headlines with photographers with the full spectacle of Patton arriving at war, but simultaneously maintain the fiction that FUSAG still exists, that Patton is merely one piece of a larger operation, that the real invasion force is still gathering at Dover for a strike at Calais. Use Patton as real bait, pretending to be fake bait, so that the fake army appears to be real. An intelligence officer tries to follow the logic. "Sir, once Patton commands an actual army in actual combat, the Germans will see him fighting real battles." "Exactly," Churchill says. "And they will spend 2 weeks trying to determine whether those battles are the main Allied effort or a diversion. That uncertainty is worth more than a division of tanks." The room is silent. Someone finally says, "Sir, that is either brilliant or completely insane." Churchill puts down his cigar. "Often the same thing. Now we need Eisenhower to convince Patton to cooperate." The silence returns, because every man in that room knows exactly what Patton cooperating will look like, and none of them envy Eisenhower the conversation he is about to have. June 15th, 1944, 10 Downing Street. Eisenhower arrives at Churchill's private study in the evening. The room is thick with cigar smoke. Churchill pours brandy, and then he explains his plan. Eisenhower listens without interrupting. He processes the entire proposal, and then he says very carefully, "You want me to do what with Patton?" Churchill explains again. Eisenhower is quiet for a moment. "You want me to tell George Patton, the most egotistical general in the American military, that he needs to downplay his own achievements for strategic deception purposes?" "Yes." "You want me to ask him to win battles quietly?" "Yes." "To capture cities while acting like they do not matter?" "Yes." "To succeed while pretending it is all just a distraction?" "Precisely. Is there a problem?" Eisenhower laughs. It is a tired, slightly hysterical sound. Winston asking George Patton to win quietly is like asking a peacock to hide its feathers. It contradicts his entire nature. "But will you attempt it?" Eisenhower drains his brandy in one swallow. He sits for a moment. He thinks about every conversation he has ever had with George Patton, every phone call, every argument, every time Patton demanded recognition, demanded command, demanded the headline. This, Eisenhower finally says, is going to be a disaster. Or, Churchill replies with a slight smile, "It is going to be brilliant." June 16th, 1944. The conversation. Patton arrives at Eisenhower's headquarters outside London the following morning. He is immediately suspicious. He can read Eisenhower's expressions the way a good soldier reads terrain. Something complicated is coming. Eisenhower starts with the good news. Third Army, France, 2 weeks. Patton's entire face changes. Finally. Then Eisenhower explains the rest. The silence that follows is absolute. "You want me," Patton says slowly, "to fight battles and not take credit for them." "Not exactly. You want me to capture cities and pretend they do not matter. We want you to let them be interpreted as, you want me to win quietly." Patton's voice has risen to a volume that is making Eisenhower's aide in the next room suddenly find somewhere else to be. "Do you have any conception of what you are asking? I cannot capture cities quietly. I cannot win battles without people noticing. The entire point of Brittany is capturing ports. How do you capture ports? Subtly." Eisenhower explains patiently. The Germans at Calais, the 2-week window, the lives saved by every day those panzer reserves stay in the wrong place. Patton is quiet for a very long time. "You are asking me to sacrifice my reputation for operational security," he finally says. "Yes." "To win battles without recognition." "Yes." "And let Montgomery get the headlines while I do the actual fighting." "That is not what I said." "It is what will happen." Patton looks at Eisenhower with something that might be pity. "Ike, I understand the strategic logic, I do. But you are asking me to be something I am not. I win loudly, boldly, publicly. That is who I am." "Can you try to be someone else?" Eisenhower asks, "just for a few weeks?" Patton stares at him. "You want me to do what with my victories? Hide them, pretend they are unimportant. Ike, I have spent my entire career preparing for this moment, and you are asking me to arrive at that moment in disguise." June 17th, 1944. The compromise. Churchill comes on the phone the next morning. Eisenhower has barely slept. Patton has not called back, which could mean either that he is considering the proposal or that he has decided to simply ignore it entirely. Churchill speaks to Patton directly. He does not flatter. He does not manage. He states a fact. "General Patton, you are the finest battlefield commander the Allies possess. Possibly the finest of this entire war. The Germans know this. They fear you, and that fear is a strategic weapon that we intend to use." Patton says nothing, but he is listening. "When you take command of Third Army," Churchill continues, "German intelligence will go into a crisis. They will ask themselves, is Patton the main Allied effort, Or is he drawing our forces away from something even larger? That question, that uncertainty, will paralyze their decision-making. By the time they find the answer, you will already be across France. Patton considers this. So I fight the way I want to fight. No restrictions on tactics or operations. None whatsoever. I just downplay my own success in interviews for a few weeks until the deception is no longer useful. That is correct. Another long pause. Then, and when the deception ends, I get full credit. Every victory, every mile, every German division destroyed. You have my word, Churchill says. When the time comes, history will know what George S. Patton achieved. The pause that follows is the longest of all. Then Patton says, "Fine, I will do it." A beat. But Winston, I can control what I say. I cannot control how loudly I win. If Third Army achieves spectacular success, and Third Army will achieve spectacular success, people will notice. Deception or no deception. That, Churchill says, is entirely acceptable. We are not asking you to fail quietly. We are asking you to succeed while maintaining strategic ambiguity. That. Patton replies, I can do. July 28, 1944. Third Army goes to war. Third Army becomes operational in France on July 28, 1944. Patton crosses the Channel and arrives in Normandy with his ivory revolvers, his polished helmet, his absolute certainty that he is about to win the fastest campaign in American military history. He is correct. Third Army advances 30 miles on the first day, 50 miles in 2 days. By the end of the first week, they have reached the base of the Brittany Peninsula, and they are pouring through the gap. Patton is moving faster than his own supply lines can follow. He does not care. He keeps moving. Back at Eisenhower's headquarters, intelligence officers monitor the German response with something close to disbelief. German High Command is receiving reports of Third Army's advance. They are watching Patton move across France at a speed that defies military logic. And they are frozen, uncertain, paralyzed by exactly the question Churchill predicted they would ask. Is this the main Allied effort? Or is Patton drawing us away from something larger? Their reserves at Calais do not move. For 2 weeks, 2 critical weeks, an entire German army sits in the wrong place, waiting for an invasion that will never come, while Patton tears through France like a force of nature. And every day those reserves stay at Calais, the Allied foothold in Normandy grows stronger. Every day is thousands of soldiers who do not have to fight a panzer division. Every day is miles of liberated France. Every day is the war ending faster. Patton gives press conferences where he describes Third Army as a supporting operation. He tells reporters that General Montgomery's forces are achieving significant results. He uses phrases like, "We are all contributing to the same goal," phrases that visibly cost him something to produce, as though each word of false modesty is being extracted one at a time. After one particularly diplomatic press conference, his chief of staff finds him alone in his office. "Sir, that was very well handled." "I feel," Patton says quietly, "like I just betrayed myself." He stares at the wall for a moment. "I am winning the fastest campaign in American military history, and I am telling reporters it is a supporting operation." He is silent for a long time after that. But the deception holds, and somewhere in a German command post near Calais, a general looks at his maps and decides to wait one more day before moving his tanks. That decision will cost Germany the war in the West. But here is what no one at Eisenhower's headquarters is ready for, what no one has planned, for what no strategic document has anticipated. Patton is about to look at his map of Brittany, look at the retreating chaos of the German army to the east, and make a decision that will force Eisenhower to tear up the entire plan. Because Patton has seen something. An opportunity so enormous, so unexpected, so perfectly timed, that ignoring it would be the greatest military mistake of the war. And taking it means the deception ends. The curtain comes down. Everything changes. In Part 2, we will follow Patton as he pivots east toward Paris, in defiance of his original orders, and watch as the most carefully constructed military deception in history collides with the most unstoppable battlefield commander of the 20th century. The German army is in chaos. The road to France is open, and George S. Patton is done pretending. August 2nd, 1944. Brittany, France. 3 weeks ago, George S. Patton was commanding a fake army made of rubber tanks and radio deception. Today, Third Army has advanced 100 miles in 5 days. The fastest armored advance in American military history is happening right now, and the man responsible for it is being asked to describe it as a supporting operation. The deception is holding. German reserves at Calais still have not moved. Every day they stay frozen is another day Patton burns through France like a wildfire through dry grass. The plan is working perfectly. Which is exactly when it starts to fall apart. Because Patton has looked at his maps. He has looked at the retreating chaos of the German 7th Army to the east, and he has seen something that changes everything. Something so obvious, so enormous, so catastrophically urgent, that staying in Brittany following his original orders, maintaining the deception, playing his assigned role, would be the single greatest military mistake of the entire war. And Eisenhower is about to tell him no. 13,000 German soldiers are escaping through a gap near Falaise. Every hour that gap stays open, another regiment slips through. Another division. Another 10,000 men who will regroup, rearm, and kill Allied soldiers for another year. The window to close that gap is measured not in days, but in hours. And the only commander with the speed and the positioning to close it is Patton. But Patton is supposed to be in Brittany, capturing ports, maintaining ambiguity, pretending Third Army is a sideshow.
This
is where the plan meets reality, and reality does not blink. Ike, Patton says over the secure line from his forward headquarters on August 3rd, his voice carrying the particular controlled tension of a man trying very hard not to shout. The Germans are running. The 7th Army is collapsing. There is a gap at Falaise and I can close it. Give me permission to pivot east. Eisenhower's response is immediate. That was not part of the plan, George. The plan did not account for the German army being in complete chaos. If you pivot east, you become the main Allied effort. The deception ends. We lose the strategic advantage we have been protecting for 2 months. Patton is quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Ike, 13,000 German soldiers are walking out of that gap right now. How many of them do you want to kill next year in Germany? The silence on Eisenhower's end is longer than 3 seconds. This is the moment that defines the entire operation. On one side, the most successful strategic deception in the history of modern warfare. On the other side, one of the most significant tactical opportunities of the entire European campaign. Eisenhower cannot have both. He has to choose. He chooses Patton. Permission granted, Eisenhower says. But George, this makes you the main effort now. We cannot maintain the deception anymore. Patton's reply comes instantly. Good, he says. I am tired of pretending my victories do not matter. August 5th, 1944. The pivot. Third Army turns east with the speed of a cavalry charge. Patton pushes his columns through the night, ignoring supply limitations, ignoring the screaming protests of his logistics officers, ignoring every conventional military principle that says you consolidate before you advance. He does not consolidate. He does not pause. He accelerates. Within 48 hours, Third Army has covered 60 miles. Within 4 days, they are threatening to encircle the entire German 7th Army near the town of Argenton. The Falaise pocket is forming. 2 entire German armies are being compressed into a killing ground from which there is no escape. German commanders send frantic radio transmissions to Berlin. Their reports describe an American armored force moving at speeds they have never encountered. They request permission to retreat. They request reinforcement. They describe Third Army's advance with a word that appears in multiple captured German documents from this period. The word is unglaublich, unbelievable. Back at Eisenhower's headquarters, the deception officers are shutting down the Fortitude operation. The fake radio traffic from Dover goes silent. The inflatable rubber tanks are deflated and packed away. The fiction of Fusag dissolves like smoke in wind. 2 months of elaborate theater comes to an end. And the German reserves at Calais finally begin to move. 2 weeks too late. August 12, 1944. The press notices. The headlines that Patton has been denied for 2 months arrive all at once. Patton's army races across France. Third Army advances 80 miles in a week. Fastest armored advance in military history. Patton reads the newspapers with something close to physical relief. He gives interviews without the careful diplomatic language, without the references to Montgomery's important operations, without the performance of modesty that has been costing him something essential every single day. Third Army has done in 2 weeks what other armies have not done in 2 months, he tells a reporter from Stars and Stripes. He does not say it with arrogance. He says it the way a carpenter discusses a well-made table. It is simply true. He is simply saying it. His soldiers read the headlines and something changes in them. Pride that had been suppressed for weeks, pride in their impossible speed, their relentless advance, their commander's absolute refusal to slow down, that pride surfaces all at once. Units that have been fighting under the public fiction that they are a supporting operation discover overnight that they are the most celebrated army in the European theater. Eisenhower watches this transformation and understands something he had not fully anticipated. Patton had been right about one thing. The cost of the deception had not only been paid by Patton's ego. It had been paid by every soldier in Third Army who spent 3 weeks winning extraordinary victories in anonymity. He calls Patton. "George, that interview was almost diplomatic." "Almost." Patton agrees. "Ike, I praised the strategic deception. I acknowledged its necessity. I even said it saved Allied lives, which is true. But I am done being subtle. My soldiers deserve the recognition they have earned." "They have it," Eisenhower says. "All of it." A pause. Then Patton says something that surprises Eisenhower completely. "How long did the Calais reserves stay frozen after I went operational in Brittany? How long before they moved?" 14 days, Eisenhower says. Another pause. Longer. 14 days. Patton repeats quietly. "How many men is that?" Eisenhower understands the question. 14 days of German armored reserves sitting in the wrong location. 14 days of fewer panzers reinforcing Normandy. 14 days that Montgomery used to consolidate the breakout that Bradley used to expand the beachhead that the entire Allied operation used to plant its feet firmly enough in France that nothing could push it back into the sea. "Thousands," Eisenhower says simply. "Thousands of men who are alive because of those 14 days. Patton does not respond immediately. When he speaks again, his voice has changed slightly. The performance is gone. The ego is set aside. What remains is a soldier calculating a cost-benefit that he has been avoiding doing because the math requires him to admit something he does not like admitting. "Then it was worth it," Patton says. "I still hated every minute of it, but it was worth it." August 20th, 1944. Churchill's assessment. Churchill receives the intelligence reports at 10 Downing Street and reads them with the focused attention he gives to things that have exceeded his expectations. Third Army's advance across France is documented in columns of numbers miles covered German units, destroyed territory, liberated prisoners taken, and those numbers tell a story that Churchill finds genuinely remarkable. He calls Eisenhower. Ike, I am reading these reports about Patton's operations. Quite extraordinary. He exceeded all expectations, Eisenhower admits, and the deception worked longer than we had any right to expect. Those 2 extra weeks, Churchill says. Those 2 extra, that is what Montgomery needed. That is what saved the breakout. George will never admit it publicly, Eisenhower says, but his restraint in those early press conferences was as important as anything Third Army did on the battlefield, maybe more important. Churchill is quiet for a moment. He is like a great stage actor forced to perform in an empty theater. Brilliant, talented, but desperately needing an audience. That is exactly what he is, Eisenhower says. And for 3 weeks, he performed without one. That is the hardest thing I have ever asked anyone to do. He did it, Churchill says. Barely, grudgingly, with constant complaints. But yes, he did it. September 1944. The recognition. Third Army's achievements become front-page news across the Allied world. In 30 days, Patton's forces have advanced 400 miles. They have liberated 50,000 square miles of French territory. They have captured or destroyed enough German equipment to outfit several divisions. They have moved so fast that their supply lines physically cannot keep up. Gasoline is being flown in by aircraft because the roads cannot deliver it quickly enough for Third Army's pace. The recognition arrives in waves. Time magazine, the Associated Press, BBC broadcasts, letters from American schoolchildren addressed simply to General Patton, France, that somehow find him at his forward headquarters. Patton gives an interview that Eisenhower reads 3 times. Was the deception operation frustrating? The reporter asks. Frustrating, Patton says. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Winning battles while pretending they were not important. Having to describe Third Army as a supporting operation when we were doing the most aggressive work in the theater. Yes, it was frustrating. He pauses. But it was necessary. Strategic deception saved Allied lives. I did not like my role, but I understood it. And when ordered to do it for the greater good, I did it. Then he adds with complete Patton honesty, I am very glad it is over. Eisenhower reads that last line and laughs for the first time in weeks. But here is what no intelligence report, no headline, and no Churchill assessment is prepared for. Because while Patton is giving interviews in liberated France, and while German reserves are finally moving west from Calais 2 weeks too late, something else is happening in the captured German command documents flowing into Allied intelligence. The Germans have learned something. Not the truth about Fusag. Not the mechanics of the fortitude deception. Something more dangerous. German intelligence has identified the pattern, the specific way Allied commanders use deception operations to mask their real intentions. They have studied what happened at Calais. They have reverse-engineered the logic of the fake army, and they are building a counter-doctrine. A new German intelligence framework designed specifically to defeat the next Allied deception before it begins. The first reports arrive at Eisenhower's desk in late September. His intelligence chief places a translated document on the table without comment. Eisenhower reads it twice. Then he picks up the phone. Winston, he says when Churchill answers, we have a problem. What kind of problem? The kind where the Germans have figured out how we think. They have studied fortitude. They have identified our methodology. The next time we try to deceive them, they will be looking for it. The silence from Churchill's end is different from any silence Eisenhower has heard before. It is the silence of a man recalculating an entire strategic landscape. Then we will need a deception. Churchill finally says, that does not look like a deception. Eisenhower stares at the document on his desk. And how exactly do we do that? I have an idea, Churchill says. And somewhere in Eisenhower's headquarters, A staff officer who has been listening to this exchange turns to his colleague and says quietly, "God help us. He has another idea." In Part 3, the Germans are no longer fooled by phantom armies and fake radio traffic. They have learned. They are watching. And Churchill's next deception will require something even more impossible than asking Patton to win quietly. It will require convincing the enemy that the truth itself is a lie, using real information to create a false picture in the most psychologically sophisticated intelligence operation of the entire war. The stakes are no longer one beach. They are the entire Western Front. And the clock is running out. September 1944. Eisenhower's headquarters, France. Patton 1. Third Army advanced 400 miles in 30 days. The Fortitude deception held for 14 critical days after D-Day. German reserves sat frozen at Calais while Allied forces cemented their foothold in Normandy. Thousands of men survived who should have died. The plan worked. But now the Germans have studied it. They have reverse-engineered the methodology. They know how Allied deception operations think. And Churchill has just told Eisenhower he has another idea. A deception that does not look like a deception using real information to create a false picture. Here is what neither man knows yet. 48 hours ago, a German intelligence officer in a captured farmhouse outside Metz sat down with a stack of recovered Allied documents and wrote a 17-page analysis. His conclusion underlined twice in red ink: the Allies will attempt another large-scale deception before any major offensive. Identify the deception, and the real attack reveals itself automatically. That document is already on its way to Field Marshal Walter Model's headquarters, and Model is already redeploying his reconnaissance units. The hunters have become the hunted, and this is where the story gets truly dangerous. The German response. Model is not Rommel. He is not charismatic. He is not beloved by his troops, but he is methodical, precise, and genuinely brilliant at defensive warfare, which is why Hitler calls him his fireman, deploying him wherever the front is collapsing. By September 1944, Model commands Army Group B, and he has spent 3 weeks doing nothing but studying what happened in Normandy. His conclusion matches his intelligence officer's analysis. The Allies won at Normandy because Germany believed the deception. The solution is simple in theory and brutal in execution. Treat every Allied movement as potentially genuine. Commit reserves only when physical contact confirms the main effort. Do not react to signals intelligence. Do not react to radio traffic. React only to steel and blood. Day. It is a counter-doctrine built entirely to defeat the Fortitude methodology. And it is correct. Model presents his analysis to German High Command in the first week of September. The response is immediate. German reconnaissance along the entire Western Front increases by 60%. Radio intercept units are doubled. Every Allied armored movement triggers immediate physical reconnaissance, actual aircraft, actual observers, actual confirmation before any reserve movement. The fake army playbook is dead. At Eisenhower's headquarters, Allied intelligence picks up the change within days. German reconnaissance patterns have shifted. Response times to Allied movements have slowed dramatically, not because the Germans are confused, but because they are being disciplined. They are waiting for confirmation before reacting. They have learned patience. They are no longer fooled by signals. Eisenhower's intelligence chief tells him on September 14th, "Whatever we transmit, they verify physically before acting. The Fortitude model is finished." Eisenhower stares at the map. Somewhere on the other side of that map model is doing the same thing. 2 generals. 1 problem. One of them has to be wrong. But here is what Model's counter-doctrine does not account for. It is built on an assumption. The assumption that the Allies will attempt another large-scale deception. That they will create another phantom army. That the pattern will repeat. Churchill's new idea does not repeat the pattern. It inverts it entirely. The crisis. The internal argument begins immediately. Churchill's proposal reaches Eisenhower's planning staff on September 18th and produces the loudest disagreement of the entire European campaign. The idea is this: instead of using fake forces to mask real intentions, use real forces to confirm fake intentions. Deploy actual Allied divisions in positions that suggest an offensive toward one objective, while the real offensive strikes somewhere completely different. No rubber tanks, no fake radio traffic. Real soldiers, real equipment, real movements. All of it genuine. All of it pointing the wrong direction. The argument against it fills 3 pages of a planning memo. We are proposing to sacrifice real operational security for psychological effect, one senior officer writes. We are using actual Allied divisions as a deception mechanism. If the enemy attacks those divisions while they are in their deception positions, we suffer real casualties for a strategic trick. He is not wrong. The plan requires 3 divisions to advance toward Saarbrücken in a movement that looks exactly like the opening of a major offensive. Model's forces will respond. There will be real fighting, real casualties, all to draw German reserves away from the actual target, the Hürtgen Forest, where the First Army will attempt to punch through to the Rhine. Patton is called back into the planning session. He reads the proposal. He reads it again. You want to use 3 divisions as bait, he says. Not bait, the planning officer says carefully. A fixing operation. You want to use 3 divisions as bait, Patton repeats, looking at Eisenhower. And you want me to command them. The room is very quiet. George. I will do it, Patton says. He says it without the complaints, without the negotiation, without the speech about his ego and his soldiers and the cost of anonymity. He says it flatly, immediately, without hesitation. If it shortens the war, I will do it. How many times do I have to prove that? Eisenhower looks at him for a long moment. Then he nods. You are sure? I am sure of exactly one thing, Patton says. Every week this war continues, more men die. If 3 divisions advancing toward Saarbrücken saves 10,000 men in the Hürtgen, then that is the arithmetic. Do the arithmetic. Nobody in the room says anything, because the man who spent 3 weeks complaining about winning quietly has just volunteered without being asked to spend his soldiers as a strategic distraction. The ego has not disappeared. It has simply been subordinated to something larger than itself. That is Patton's real transformation, and it happens in a single sentence. November 2nd, 1944. The Saarbrücken Advance. Third Army moves on November 2nd at 0600 hours. 3 divisions, 60,000 men, 400 tanks. They advance toward Saarbrücken with everything. Patton has full artillery support, air cover, maximum armor concentration. It looks exactly like the opening of a major offensive, because it is executed with the full commitment of a major offensive. Model's reconnaissance confirms it within 2 hours. Aircraft, observers, physical contact. Everything his counter-doctrine requires. German radio intercepts go silent. The Allies know they are being watched, and they are not bothering to deceive through signals. The movement is completely transparent, which is exactly what makes it convincing. Model reads the reconnaissance reports at his headquarters outside Cologne. Patton, 3 divisions, full armor commitment, advancing toward Saarbrücken. No deception indicators, no unusual radio traffic, no phantom formations, no signals anomalies. Just 60,000 men moving forward. He moves 2 panzer divisions east to meet them. That is the moment the plan works. 40 miles north in the Hürtgen Forest, the German defensive line has just lost 2 armored divisions. The First Army attacks at 0900 hours. They advance into forest terrain that should be impenetrable. Dense trees prepared defenses, interlocking fields of fire, and they find the armored reserve that should be there is not there. It has gone to stop Patton. The Hurtgen fighting is brutal regardless. The forest does not care about strategy. Every clearing is a kill zone. Every tree line conceals a German position. American soldiers fight for individual yards of ground that have no name and will never appear on any map anyone cares about. But they fight without the weight of German armor on top of them. And that changes the arithmetic. By November 8th, First Army has advanced 6 miles into the Hurtgen. 6 miles in 6 days in that terrain is extraordinary. The German defenders' infantry without armored support, stretched thin across a forest front, cannot hold the pace. They are good soldiers fighting with everything they have. But they are missing the 2 panzer divisions that went south to face Patton. Third Army, meanwhile, is fighting Model's armored counterattack with the contained ferocity of soldiers who know they are not supposed to win dramatically. They hold. They advance slowly. They absorb the German response and do not break. Patton manages his 3 divisions with surgical precision, enough pressure to maintain German attention, not enough commitment to trigger a full withdrawal that would free those panzer divisions to move north. It is the most disciplined fighting of Patton's career. Not fast, not spectacular, not the headlines, just steady, grinding, methodical pressure that keeps 2 German armored divisions fixed in the wrong location for 11 days. On November 13th, with First Army's breakthrough in the Hurtgen confirmed, Patton receives orders to disengage. He pulls Third Army back to prepared positions. The 2 German panzer divisions released from the Saarbrücken front begin moving north. Too late. 11 days too late. WWII. First Army is through the Hurtgen. The path to the Roer River is open. The Rhine is the next obstacle. The German defensive line that Model built to stop exactly this kind of breakthrough is breached not by deception, not by phantom armies, but by real soldiers who had room to operate because Patton gave it to them. German after-action reports from the Hurtgen campaign recovered after the war contain a phrase that appears in 3 separate documents from 3 separate commanders. Translated from German, it reads, "The armored reserve arrived too late to be useful. 2 panzer divisions. 11 days. That is the margin." The reckoning. Model requests a meeting with German High Command on November 20th. He presents his analysis of what happened. His counter-doctrine, verify everything physically before committing reserves, had worked exactly as designed. He verified. He confirmed. He responded to a real threat. The problem Model explains with characteristic bluntness is that the threat was real. The enemy did not deceive us, he tells his superiors. They used genuine forces to create a genuine threat that required a genuine response. We responded correctly to incorrect information, not because we were fooled, but because the information was accurate. Hitler does not accept this explanation. He relieves 2 corps commanders and assigns blame to everyone except the doctrine that failed. But Model's analysis is correct. Churchill's inversion worked because it was not a deception in the traditional sense. It was a manipulation of priorities using entirely real assets. The Allied intelligence assessment completed in December 1944 estimates that the Hurtgen breakthrough shortened the campaign to reach the Rhine by approximately 3 weeks. 3 weeks on the Western Front in late 1944, with winter approaching, represents a calculation in lives that runs into the thousands. Eisenhower reads the assessment and puts it down without comment. He has been doing mathematics like this since June. The numbers never get easier. The recognition no one expected. Patton is not in the headlines after Saarbrücken. Third Army's role is described in official communiques as supporting operations on the southern flank. The press focuses on First Army's Hurtgen breakthrough. The strategic context, the reason First Army had room to move, is classified for another year. His soldiers know. They fought Model's panzers for 11 days with the specific instruction not to win too decisively. They held when they could have advanced. They absorbed attacks that could have been counterattacked. And they did it with the professional discipline of men who trust their commander knows something they do not. Which, for once, is exactly true. Eisenhower visits Third Army headquarters in late November. He and Patton sit with brandy and maps and the particular silence of men who have been through something together that cannot be adequately described to anyone else. "You know what you did," Eisenhower says finally. "I know what we did," Patton says. A pause. "History will not record Saarbrücken the way it should," Eisenhower says. "History rarely does," Patton replies. "That stopped bothering me somewhere around August." Eisenhower looks at him. The man across the table is recognizably George Patton, the revolver's the posture, the absolute certainty of his own capabilities. But something has shifted. The ego is still there. It has simply found something larger to serve than itself. George, Eisenhower says quietly, "You may have been the best decision I made in this entire war." Patton picks up his brandy. "I was definitely the most difficult," he says. They drink. But here is the question that no one in that room is asking. The question that will not be asked publicly for decades. The question about what happens to a man who fights 3 different kinds of wars in the same campaign: the visible war, the invisible war, and the war against his own nature. What does George S. Patton become after all of this? What is the cost of a man who learned to subordinate his ego to a larger purpose? And what does it mean for the history of warfare that the most aggressive, most self-promoting, most impossibly difficult general in the American military turned out to be the only man capable of doing what needed to be done? That answer waits in the final chapter, the one most historians rush past. The one about what Patton said in the last months of his life when the war was over and the headlines were gone and the only audience left was history itself. In Part 4, the war ends. The deception operations are declassified. And George S. Patton, with nothing left to fight, faces the hardest battle of his life. A battle he does not win. The story has one more chapter. And it is the one that changes everything you thought you knew about him. December 1944. The Western Front. From a phantom army made of rubber tanks and fake radio signals to the fastest armored advance in American military history. From a general commanded to win quietly to a commander who volunteered his soldiers as strategic bait to save thousands of men he would never meet. 3 deception operations. 3 different kinds of war fought simultaneously by 3 impossible men who should never have worked together, and somehow did. But the cliffhanger from Part 3 asked a question that statistics cannot answer. What happens to the man after the mission ends? What does George S. Patton become when there is nothing left to deceive, no ego left to suppress, no enemy left to outmaneuver? The answer has a twist, and it is the kind of twist that reframes everything that came before it. Because the greatest cost of this story was not paid on a battlefield. It was paid in a staff car on a quiet road in Germany, 3 weeks after the war ended on a Tuesday afternoon, when nothing important was supposed to happen. The last campaign. Germany surrenders on May 8, 1945. Third Army is in Czechoslovakia. Patton has advanced further faster, against stronger opposition than any commander in the European theater. His forces liberated concentration camps, crossed the Rhine, and penetrated deeper into the Reich than any other Allied army. 400 miles in 30 days in France was the headline. The total distance covered by Third Army from Normandy to the end of the war exceeds 1,000 miles. The recognition arrives in full. Every headline that was suppressed during the deception operations, every victory that was downplayed as a supporting operation, every achievement that was sacrificed to strategic ambiguity, all of it surfaces in the months after victory. Patton becomes the most celebrated American general of the European War. His photograph is on magazine covers. His speeches are reprinted in newspapers. His name is known in households that cannot locate France on a map. He is 59 years old. He has achieved everything he spent his life preparing for, and he is immediately, profoundly, completely lost. The army that gave his life structure and purpose is demobilizing. The soldiers who made Third Army legendary are going home. The enemies who made his genius necessary are defeated. Patton is given command of 15th Army, an administrative posting essentially a headquarters without combat troops, tasked with compiling historical records of the European campaign. He calls it a death sentence delivered by paperwork. In letters to his wife Beatrice written during this period, Patton describes a feeling that military historians have documented in commanders throughout history, but rarely discuss publicly. The feeling of a weapon that has outlasted its war. "I have done what I was made to do," he writes in one letter, dated June 1945. "I do not know what I am made to do now." He makes political statements that embarrass the Allied command. He compares denazification policies to American political party conflicts. He is relieved of command of Third Army in October 1945. It is presented publicly as a reassignment. It is understood privately as a punishment. He does not fight the decision. The man who fought everything orders enemies his own ego. Churchill's complicated plans. Eisenhower's diplomatic management does not fight his own relief from command. His chief of staff, who has served with him since North Africa, later says that Patton seemed almost relieved, as though the decision confirmed something he already knew about what the peace held for him. On December 9, 1945, near Mannheim, Germany, his staff car is struck by an American Army truck at low speed on an otherwise unremarkable road. The collision is minor. Everyone involved walks away unhurt, except Patton, who is thrown forward and sustains a spinal injury that paralyzes him from the neck down. He dies on December 21, 1945, 12 days after the accident, 13 years to the month before what would have been his 73rd birthday. Beatrice is with him. He does not recover consciousness for most of the final days. The war has been over for 7 months. He never sees the full accounting of what he made possible. He never reads the intelligence assessments that quantify the lives saved by the Fortitude deception. He never sees the declassified documents confirming that his restraint during those 3 weeks of quiet victories was as strategically significant as any battle Third Army fought. He dies before history finishes deciding what he was. The legacy that outlasted the man. The deception methodology developed during Operation Fortitude does not die with the war. It evolves. It spreads. It becomes the foundational doctrine for psychological operations across every major Western military for the next half-century. The specific innovation, using a commander's personal reputation as a strategic weapon, deploying his presence to fix enemy attention while the real blow falls elsewhere, is studied at military academies in the United States, Britain, Israel, and eventually in the war colleges of countries that were enemies in 1944. The Fortitude model is taught not as a historical curiosity, but as an operational template. During the Korean War, MacArthur's Incheon landing uses elements of the same principle, fixing North Korean attention on the Pusan perimeter, while the real strike lands behind their lines. Military historians who study both operations identify the direct doctrinal lineage. The lesson from 1944 has transferred intact. In the Falklands War of 1982, British deception operations designed to convince Argentine commanders that the main landing would occur at one location while the actual assault came elsewhere draw explicitly from Second World War precedents that include fortitude. The British officers who designed those operations had studied the Patton problem. How do you use a highly visible, highly credible asset to direct enemy attention, and applied the answer in the South Atlantic 38 years later. The total assessment, compiled by military historians across multiple declassified sources, estimates that Operation Fortitude and its extended operations saved between 15,000 and 25,000 Allied lives by keeping German reserves out of position during the critical first weeks of the Normandy campaign. The 14 days of frozen German reserves at Calais, the 14 days that Patton's quiet victories purchased, represent the single largest return on a strategic deception operation in recorded military history. 25,000 lives. 14 days. 3 weeks of Patton suppressing his ego for the greater good. The arithmetic is staggering, and it raises a question that military ethicists have been arguing about ever since. The lesson that matters most. The surface lesson of this story is about deception. About using fake armies and phantom threats and the strategic manipulation of enemy intelligence. That lesson is real, and it is important, and military planners have been applying it for 80 years. But the deeper lesson is about something that has nothing to do with tanks or radio traffic or rubber decoys. It is about the relationship between individual nature and institutional necessity. About what happens when the most important thing a person can do is the thing most contrary to who they are. Patton was not a subtle man. He was not built for deception. He was built for the visible, the loud, the glorious, for the kind of warfare where the point is to make the enemy fear you personally, directly, unmistakably. Churchill understood this when he selected Patton for the Fortitude role. He was not looking for a man who was comfortable with deception. He was looking for a man whose discomfort with deception would make the deception work. Patton's reputation was real because Patton was real. The Germans feared him because his fear was earned. You cannot fake that with rubber tanks. The institution. The Allied command structure. The strategic planning apparatus. The entire system of military hierarchy asked Patton to be something he was not. And Patton, who spent his career fighting every constraint ever placed on him, found a way to comply. Not because he stopped being himself, but because he understood finally and completely that his self was not the most important thing in the room. That is the lesson that transfers, not just to warfare, to every organization that has ever asked someone brilliant and difficult to subordinate their brilliance to a larger purpose, to every institution that has ever had to convince its most capable and most impossible member that the mission matters more than the recognition. History is full of people who refused that negotiation, who chose their ego over the mission and watched the mission fail. Patton almost made that choice. He complained. He argued. He called Eisenhower at night to object. He told Churchill directly that what they were asking was contrary to his nature. And then he did it anyway. Every time. The document no one expected. Here is the detail that most histories omit. The document that reframes the entire story. In 2012, the National Archives released a collection of previously classified correspondence from Eisenhower's personal files. Among the letters is one dated November 28, 1944, written by Eisenhower to the Army Chief of Staff, General George Marshall, in Washington. The letter is about personnel recommendations for the post-war Army structure. Eisenhower writes about Patton at length. He discusses the battlefield record, the deception operations, the Saarbrücken fixing operation. All of that was expected in a personnel assessment. What was not expected is the final paragraph. Eisenhower writes, "What Patton demonstrated in the summer and autumn of 1944 was not primarily tactical brilliance which he possessed in abundance and which history will record. What he demonstrated was the capacity to accept a role that diminished him publicly while serving a purpose he believed in privately. I have commanded many officers. I have never commanded one who found that particular discipline more difficult or who ultimately performed it more completely." Then Eisenhower adds a single sentence that his biographers have discussed ever since. George Patton won many battles. His greatest achievement was the one that never appeared in any communique. The letter was written 3 weeks before Patton's accident. Eisenhower never showed it to him. There is no record of whether he intended to. The letter went into the classified files and stayed there for 67 years. Patton never knew that Eisenhower considered the quiet victories his greatest achievement. He died not knowing. He died having heard the public recognition, the headlines the magazine covers the crowds, and having never heard the private assessment that valued something different entirely. Whether that would have mattered to him is a question no one can answer. The man who said, "Fighting my own ego was the hardest battle of the war," might have understood. The man who called the months of deception torture might not have wanted to know. Patton was large enough to contain both possibilities simultaneously. He usually did. The accounting. From a phantom army that existed only in German intelligence files to a real army that covered 1,000 miles of liberated Europe. From a general who commanded rubber tanks in Dover to a commander who volunteered his soldiers as strategic bait to save men in a forest 40 miles away. From a plan that Eisenhower called a disaster to an operation that Churchill called one of the war's most sophisticated achievements. 3 impossible men, 1 impossible plan, and a result that military historians have spent 80 years trying to fully quantify, because the lives saved by a deception that worked cannot be counted, the same way you count the lives taken by a battle that was fought. 25,000 estimated lives, 14 critical days, 3 weeks of a man fighting his own nature for a mission he believed in. That is the arithmetic of Operation Fortitude's extended deception. That is what Churchill's complicated idea and Eisenhower's impossible management and Patton's grudging complaining never quite graceful compliance actually produced. If you have followed this story across 4 parts, you already know that the most interesting question was never whether the deception would work. It was whether the most difficult man in the Allied command could be convinced to make it work. The answer delivered across 3 months of frustration and brilliance and ego and sacrifice is yes, barely, grudgingly, with constant complaints. But completely. If you know a story like this one, a moment where one person's impossible decision changed the arithmetic of history, leave it in the comments. There are hundreds of stories like this, buried in the Second World War alone. We have barely started. So, subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because the next story begins the same way this one did, with someone being told that their idea is completely insane. They were right. And it changed everything anyway. The measure of a great commander is not how loudly he wins. It is whether he can win quietly when the mission requires it, and whether the mission is worth the silence.